Well, good morning, everyone. If you're visiting for the very first time with us today, or first time online today, just let me tell you a little about our church. And how we typically do our message series. We typically go kind of in these series where you preach over the course of 3 or 4 or 5 weeks, and it gives us a chance to cover a lot of ground so we don't feel like we have to cover everything in one day. And that's important for you to know as we start today, because today is simply an introduction. When we get done at the end of the day and you think, well, what about this and what about that, Mike? Just remember, this is an introduction. Okay, we'll be all fine. And so over the next 4 weeks, we're going to be talking specifically and primarily to single people. That doesn't mean that those of you that aren't single any longer can just tune out. I hope you'll pick up some ideas. But let me tell you a couple reasons why we're doing this. The first and very foremost reason is my word. Last September, we did 4 weeks on marriage, and we asked our single people to give us some grace and cut us some slack, and while we focused on that part. And I said at that time, you'll get your chance. We'll come back next year and focus something specifically towards you, and today's the start of that. So that's the first reason. The second reason, and maybe a little more important, is I care about you and your lives. And God cares about you and your lives. And He wants nothing more than to see you get this whole relationship thing right. And the reality is, a lot of the people you know that are married didn't get it right, haven't gotten it right, and you've seen that. You've seen the results of that, and you've maybe even thought to yourself, you know what? Why would I want to do that? Because doing that, everything I see is just terrible. It's sad. And I want to give you some hope. I want to cast maybe a little bit different vision these next few weeks, that what our culture has done a terrible job doing, that maybe in listening to God, you can sense that you can have a really good job of doing it in your life. So if you're currently dating, you'd like to be dating, but yesterday was just a simple reminder that you're single, or you're kind of getting back in dating. Maybe you've gone through a divorce and it's been 20 years and you're kind of thinking, what's this going to look like, how I'm going to do that? Or maybe you're simply 20 years old and would like to but aren't quite there yet, or haven't quite figured it all out, but would like at some point to get into a relationship that maybe develops into a deep relationship, that maybe leads to being a couple, and a couple that maybe last forever, or at least as long as the two of you shall live, or one of you shall live, I guess I should say. So that's where we're kind of going next week. Let me tell you who might be frustrated over the next few weeks. And it's not the married people. I think you're going to get something out of this. You're going to be frustrated if you are a serial dater, kind of a recreational dater. One of those people that's just in it to win it, who's just out there for the fun, out there for the good times, out there for the stories they can tell their buddies later, all that kind of stuff. If you're that kind of person, you're probably going to be a little frustrated over the next few weeks. But I want you to stay with me, all right? Because I want to share some stuff starting today that I think may be of benefit to you later on in your life. Because it seems like most of us, at some point in our life, something kind of changes and we think, you know what, I'm ready to kind of take that next step, kind of change the direction. I've had all my fun, I've done all my stuff, and maybe I want to think about what life might look like that. I'm hoping that you'll keep that little slip of paper that you got in your program today, or maybe you remember, hey, they did something back years ago at that church. What's the name? Oh, New Hope. And maybe you can find the MP3 and go back. And maybe at that point, listen to it. Because here's the thing. Here's the thing I want us to start off with today. You want to write this down. The present will be your past, which will be present in your future. Let's walk through that one more time, right? The present will be your past, which will be present in your future. See, I'm telling you single people, listen to me here. This is what a lot of the married people didn't quite get. Because they thought the present was just the present at the time, right? I'm just out having a good time, Dave, living the life, baby. And when I get to that stage, I'll kind of settle down, I'll get things worked out, and everything will be fine from then on. But here's the problem. Your past will show up in your future. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. Not only will your past show up in your future, what you're doing now will follow you around. And I want you to know, single people, I want you to know this because a lot of married people are clueless to this. They thought, oh, when I meet the right person, everything's going to be great. We'll get married, and the past will be the past. I'm starting a brand new thing. We even do it at weddings, right, Steve? We introduce you to a brand new thing, never before, Mr. and Mrs. And we give this impression that it's a whole brand new day, and everything that's in the past is now in the past. But I can guarantee you that what you're doing now will follow you around. And some of you know that. Some of you have experienced that. And that's why I want to help you, those of you who are single that have not gotten to one of those kind of relationships that's taking that next step, before you get there, just to get this thing right. Because what I've discovered as a pastor, and I've talked to lots of couples. I've talked to couples that are married, couples that are happily married, couples that are not happily married. I've talked to engaged couples. I've talked to couples who are thinking about becoming engaged. I've talked to couples that would like to be couples but aren't quite couples yet because they haven't quite figured out all this stuff. I've talked to lots of people. But here's the secret that I've discovered as a pastor. I've never seen a marriage problem. Nobody comes to me for marital counseling because they have a marriage problem. Here's what they have. See, nobody comes to me with a marriage problem. A marriage problem is like, do we squeeze the toothpaste from the bottom, the middle, or do we simply get each your own and you do whatever you want, That's a marriage problem. Nobody comes to me and says, or Pastor Dave and says, we got to figure this toothpaste thing out. They come to us stuff like, do we have one checkbook or two checkbooks? We think that's a marriage problem. The problem is that's not a marriage problem. That's a single people's problem that gets brought to a marriage, and when it gets to the marriage, we think, oh, it's a marriage problem, when in reality it's a people problem. And you need to know that, because a lot of married couples that are sitting around, they didn't get that. In fact, here's the reality. They all believe the right person myth. And maybe you believe it too, because it is throughout our culture. It's what our culture pitches. It's what you've maybe heard your whole life. And I want you to know it's a myth. Because here's what the right person myth says. If I marry the right person, everything will be... Let's say that out loud together. If I marry the right person, everything will be all right. Right? I mean, that's kind of what we hear, We get kind of sold if I just marry the right person. And there's another variation of this, that when I meet the right person, everything will be all right. And we buy into this myth that all I have to do is find the right person. And when I find the right person, everything's going to be perfect. Here's the problem. When you meet the right person has the exact same thought in their mind. When I meet the right person, everything's going to be all right. We're going to be happy. I don't have to learn to be patient. I don't have to, to calm down, because they're never going to do anything to make me not be patient. They're never going to do anything to make me angry, because they're the right person, right? Do you know how the right people know they've met the right people? Write this word down. Chemistry, right? Your eyes meet. You see each other. You pass exchange numbers. You get later, and then you look in each other's eyes, and you go on long walks together, and you hold hands, and you snuggle, and you smooch, and you kiss, and you've just found your soulmate. And what you've really found is chemistry. It's what we're all looking for. And here's the thing that married couples won't tell you, but every married couple I've ever married buys into this. They believe that no one, not their parents, especially not their parents, but nobody on TV, nobody in the movies, none of this romantic, nobody has ever loved like we have before. Our love is just so much greater and stronger and deeper that you just don't understand that this is the right person. This is the right thing. Another thing that they believe is that if I meet the right person, I don't have to be good at relationships. And I want you to know that's a myth. But we believe it. Because if the person's the right person, everything's going to be great. This is what we tell ourselves. And so often I look at these things and I say, really? You believe that when you step back and look at it? But it's sort of throughout our culture. And it's probably been driven into your life because of all the stuff that's out there. This idea that if I just meet the right person, I don't have to be good at relationships. Because again, they would never do anything to make me question this whole thing. And so we don't look at relationships. What we look at is chemistry. We got chemistry, and chemistry feels good, doesn't it? Say yes. Because it does feel good. We're going to be honest. Chemistry feels good, baby. You know, and the chemistry kind of heats up, and the stuff begins to mix, you know, and there's this kind of thoughts out there, you know, that you don't buy a car without trying it out first, or you don't buy a pair of shoes without trying them out first, and so you try it out first, and intimacy is all good and wonderful and great, and things are going wonderful, and life's going good, and then maybe you move in together, or maybe you take that step and get married, and someplace along the road, problems happen. And they're not chemistry problems. They're people problems. They're relationship problems. But those relationship problems, they affect the chemistry. And so what do? And I'm single people, I want you to know what we married people do. We think, let's up the chemistry, right? Let's do something romantic, Eileen. Let's go, you know, let's do some kind of stuff, right? And the guy thinks, let's just have more sex. Because us guys, we think the sex is like a rinse, like a tool, you know. We can fix that. Just do it more, you know. It'll work itself out. And the woman's like, no, that's not how it works, you know. And so we can do all this kind of stuff. And then lo and behold, at some point, single people, you need to understand this. At some point, typically the woman says, I know how we can fix this. Let's have a baby. And the guy goes, well, that's going to require sex, so I'm in for this whole thing, right? But you laugh at it, but don't look at any married friends right now. But they're not even looking at each other because they know. They're thinking, how in the world did Mike know that? And here's why. I have an advanced degree. None of that stuff's true. Here's the truth. You're a human being. You are not as special or as unique as your mama or daddy has told you. All of us are just so predictable. And here's the problem. I mean, who thinks we're having chemistry problems, which are really relationship problems, but the way to fix it, we're going to bring another human being into this thing. A human being that is dependent on both of us. Who all they do is eat, sleep, and yes. I didn't have to say it. I mean, who thinks that's a good idea, right? I mean, single people, you look at that and you think, what? How stupid can they be? And the answer is apparently pretty stupid. Because it's a pattern that goes on and on and on because we are trying to fix chemistry problems with chemistry stuff, forgetting that it's really about a relationship issue that we have. And it's about this myth that if we just find the right person, everything's going to be all right. They will fulfill all of our needs. And we find somebody who has the exact same thought process. And we're expecting the other person, and they're expecting us to make everything just perfect and right. So here's the question that we're going to look at starting today. It's finding the right person versus being the right person. Finding the right person versus being the right person. And the real issue is, am I becoming the right person? See, all of us, when we're single, we have a list. We have a list of what we're looking for in a partner, in a spouse, in a soulmate. You know? And typically, you know, there's a little wiggle room in there, you know, of how tall really tall is, or, you know, if they kind of laugh at my jokes, you know, height doesn't matter quite as much any longer, or, you know, but we've got stuff, you know, I don't want her to have this in her past, or I don't want him to have that in his past. I don't want them to, you know, have, you know, issues with, you know, being in debt, or I don't want them to be addicted to something, you know, I don't want them to spend all their time with their friends or on video games or, you know, just doing their own thing. You know, we have all these lists. And we take that list and we look and look and look and look, hoping we're going to find somebody who matches up to that list. And, oh, we got, you know, we're at 8 of 20 now, and maybe we're going to get it closer. And we never think, what if it's not so much about having our list, but what if it's about us being the person that we're looking for on that list? See, so often we buy into this idea that, you know, when I get married, then I'll deal with all that stuff, or if I'll be forced to have to kind of, and I want to tell you, single people, today, right now is the time to begin to do the stuff you need to do. Because your past which is currently present, or your present, which will at some point be your past, will show up in your future. It just kind of goes around that way. And the sooner you understand that, the sooner you understand what I'm doing today really does affect tomorrow. There are people in this room that would stand up right at this moment and tell you that is so true. I wasn't thinking about it at the moment, but this happened, and now look what it's got me. So here's the question I want us to focus on today. Are you who the person you are looking for is looking for? Are you who the person you are looking for is looking for? Because that's really the thing you need to focus on. Who am I becoming, not where are they at out there? Who am I becoming? So I want to go over to the Bible. We're going to spend just a few minutes there. But before we go there, if you go to the Bible and look for advice on finding somebody to couple up with and to marry and to spend your life with, you know how much information you're going to find? Not a whole lot. The Bible doesn't talk a lot about finding your soulmate. One of the reasons is they had parents back then who found your soulmate. Sometimes on wedding night, Joe meet Judy, Judy meet Joe. We'll see you here in a few minutes, and, you are soulmates now, But that isn't even the laid down sort of the law there. It's just the culture of it was. But it doesn't talk a lot about looking and finding what you're looking for. But the Bible does talk an awful lot about who we're becoming. We talk about a lot here at our church. The transformation that God does in our lives. What is God doing in your life? Not worry about them, but taking care of yourself. And the amazing thing is, if you begin to read your Bible as not, what are the tips? What are the things I need to look for in a spouse? But I begin to read it as, am I who? Am I becoming who the person I'm looking for is looking for? Am I becoming who I really need to be? It just jumps off the page. But not only does it jump off the page, it tells us something very important. That what you're doing now really does affect who you'll be later. See, we all buy into this other myth that this says, when this happens, then I'm going to step up my game. When it gets serious, that's when I'll change. But the problem is when you wait too long to change, you get a set pattern in your life. And when you get a set pattern in your life, it becomes awful hard to kind of change later. So, single people, I'm trying to help you early on. You're going to get stuff that these married people don't understand, didn't get. But it can be different from you. And that's the thing I want. I want it to be different for you. Because I have seen way too many couples who are in what they think are marriage problems, and what they really are is people problems that just happen to be joined in a marriage. Because the problems they didn't take care of when they could have now got exacerbated. Thank you. Biggest word I could throw out there. Have grown large. In what's supposed to be this wonderful relationship. So we're going to go over and look at part of 1 Corinthians chapter 13. I'm not going to go through the whole list. I'm just going to touch on a couple of things. And as you leave today, we'll have some folks at the door, and you're going to get a little card like this that'll have the whole thing, and we'll talk about that towards the end. But chapter 13 is a very famous chapter in the Bible. In fact, some of you probably know it is called the love chapter, right? You got to put a little love in there, make it spice it up, right? It's the love chapter because it gives a definition, apparently from God's perspective, of what love in its most pure and authentic form looks like. And here's what it says. Love is patient. I'm just practicing my patience with you right now, so that's. Love is patient. Love is patient. Let me give you an idea of what patience means. It means you never pressure the other person. You never pressure the other person. Never is, when are you going to get this fixed? When are you going to do that? Come on. When is this going to happen? When's that going to happen? Come on. It never pressures the other person. Love, when it says it's patient, patience creates as much space and time and margin as the other person needs. That's awful hard to do. but it is what love looks like in its purest, most authentic form. It says, I'm patient. So if you're in kind of a dating relationship now, and either you or the other person is kind of the pusher in it, you know, you need to take care of this, need to do that, got to fix this, got to fix that. That's not love, that's something else, but you need to recognize it for what it is. You think it's the right person, I just got to tweak them a little bit because then they become the really right person. It's not going to happen that way, and it's not the way that God talks about it happening. But love, he says, is patient. Love is also kind. It's kind. And in our culture, we hate that word kind, right? It sounds so wimpy. You know, somebody saying, oh, Mike's such a kind man. It's like, oh, really? Give me a break. You know, put something else, but I'll take kind as long as it's attached to something else. But don't just say, he's kind. Because it just sounds, yes, thank you. So let me give it a different word that this kind in the language means. It means to be considerate. That you take into consideration how the other person feels all the time. Being kind is being considerate to somebody else. You consider their thoughts, their feelings, what they're thinking about. It's not always just a one-way street. It's a two-way thing. It says that love does not envy. Doesn't envy. And the truth of the matter is, probably a lot of you could bear witness to coming from a family that wouldn't have put this term there, but experience that term on a regular basis. I see this in relationships a lot. You know, the woman's more successful than the man, or the guy has more friends than she does, and they don't feel good about that, and so they begin to nip and, you know, fight and talk, you know, because they just don't feel good about it. And there's this sort of envy that's going on, and we wouldn't typically say it's envy, but when you see it in a situation, or when you live in it or around it, you know it's this kind of battle that's going on. Envy is simply saying, I don't feel so good about me, so I can't let you feel so good about you. Envy is a person problem. It's not a marriage problem, but marriage puts two people with sometimes one or both of them having a person problem, and thus they think it's a marriage problem, when in reality it's a us problem. And so they begin to kind of pick and, you know, talk down about the other and make sure if you're not happy, I can't be happy. And you see this, you know, one begins to tell a story, and the other one corrects them all the time, or one is doing this, and they got to bring them down so they feel better about themselves. It just goes around and around and around. Love does not boast. It is not proud. Single people, let me get back to you for just a moment, directly. What I'm suggesting here is not just to wait till the next time you have a date, because who knows how long that's going to be. Just kidding. Not to wait till the next time you have a date, but is begin to become the person you are looking for is looking for. And to do that now in every relationship, everything you have. But let's use the dating thing. So you go out on a date. And the person you're out on a date with is you know, telling you they're a fisherman, and they just caught this 5-pound bass, and they are so proud of it. They got pictures of it on their phone. And at that moment, what you need to do is just say, that's wonderful, man. Oh, let me check out those pictures. That's great, you know. Instead of telling them, you know, well, by the way, my dad and brother on the fishing channel, you know, and that's not really that big of a fish. And let me tell you my story. You know, we do this whole story thing. You tell a story, I tell a story. You tell a story, I tell a bigger story. You tell a big, you know, we kind of, it's this whole who can one up the other person. And Paul, as God inspires, says, love doesn't boast and it's not proud. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, what in the world am I going to talk about on my next date? I mean, if I follow this stuff, you know, love's patient. So we go to the door. Who opens the door? I'm considerate. I open the door. No, you. Let me open the door. No, you go first. No, I go first. No, and you finally get in. What would you like? I don't know. What would you like? Who orders for you? You go through this whole stuff, you know, and you get there, and what kind of stories do you tell? If I don't tell stories that I can boast about or proud about, I mean, I'm a guy. How do I impress her? You know, let me pick up something heavy. Let me tell you some story of some, you know, great and wonderful thing I did. I mean, you know, what do you do if you can't boast and talk about being proud about something? What do you share with somebody, you know? Tell me about your life. Well, you know, not really much I can say because I don't want to be boastful, so. I know it seems so strange and weird, but I want you to focus that what you're working on is not just a relationship. What you're working on is a you thing. Because the you thing is the only thing you can do anything about. And if you get caught up in the, telling the stories and telling the bigger stuff, what it comes across sometimes, and guys do this a lot, what comes across is you say, that's not that big a deal. Let me tell you. The big deal is here. Let me tell you the big story I got. And that may be bragging, that may be in proud, that may be the way you think you win somebody's heart, but it is not love, at least not according to how God sees love. Love does not dishonor others. Love does not dishonor others. Here's what that means. That when you date, you never create regret. You never do anything that makes the other person say, I wish I hadn't called him up on the phone. I wish I hadn't said yes to that. I wish we hadn't gone this place. I wish we hadn't, let this, You never do anything that brings regret. It means you don't behave disgracefully, dishonorably, or indecently. Now, I'm not stupid. I know there are some of you sitting here today thinking, let's see, disgracefully? That probably would describe me. Dishonorably? I've done that a few times. And indecently, isn't that kind of what it's all about, Mike? I mean, isn't that kind of, get in, get what you need, and then get out, That when somebody says, has that talk of, we need to define the relationship, you kind of go, you've just defined it. I'm out of here because there is no kind of long thing. You kind of get wrapped up in this whole story of stuff. Here's the crazy thing. We're all looking for this chemistry, this thing that brings us together. And single people, you need to know this, because a lot of married folks didn't understand this. Chemistry happens in your life a ton of times. We all think, I'm going to find my soulmate, and the chemistry will be great. It'll just bring us through everything. It'll be wonderful. And how many times have you felt chemistry with somebody else? You don't have to speak the same language as somebody to have chemistry with somebody. It's a natural kind of response that deals up. You guys know how this worked. You go out and you go someplace and you kind of, hey, you don't use your real name anymore because you kind of know how this pattern works, and they're not giving you their real name anyway, so hey, it's all great. And you're telling them if you're young enough, you're pre-med. If you're older, I'm a physicist, and you can't spell physicist, but hey, it's your line, because you got it worked out. You remember some stuff from college. You got the whole package kind of down. You guys have gone and spent, you spent summers. You've gone to summer camp, and you've had this wonderful chemistry with somebody that you are never going to see again. Or you've gone on spring break. Or gone to Las Vegas, As long as I don't use my real name, everything's fine. And we think chemistry is what it's all about. And you know that chemistry is important. It feels great. It's wonderful. And it's a part of the whole package, but it's not the thing. Think of all the songs that have been written about this idea of chemistry. Love. Love will keep us together. I'm trying to see how many old people we have in the group today. Sadly, Captain and Tennille, if you heard a couple weeks ago, breaking up, But, there's this all, there's all this stuff about love and the power of love and how somehow love is all we need. Little Beatles there, love is all we need. It's all we need. It'll just get us through, and we think love is the thing. And what we mean by love is not what God means by love. What we mean by love is the chemistry of it all, the good feeling of it all. Love is not self-seeking. Which goes right to the heart of all of these problems. Because the marriage problems that I see that aren't marriage problems, that are people problems, all tend to focus on this idea of being self-seeking. One of the sad things for us as pastors is that when people come to see us for marriage counseling, it's simply so they can check the final box on their list before they head out the door. And I'm only here, Mike, because it's the last one on the list. Give it to me, and then I'm gone. I don't want you to know how unfair that is for us. Because there isn't a whole lot you can do when somebody says, I've already unplugged everything. I got it sitting at the back of the car. I'm just waiting to load it up. I'm just waiting to talk to you to give me that chance. At least keep it plugged in. At least give me a shot with some juice still flowing through it, you know? But we get this whole stuff, and we say, and so much about it is selfish. I'm not getting what I need, and you may not be getting what you need. But it may not be a marriage problem. It's probably a people problem. And since you are one of two people in that relationship, guess what? You're one of the problems. And we don't like to hear that because we want to find the right person, because when I find the right person, everything is going to be just great and fantastic and good. And here's the crazy thing about that. We want to believe that. We want to think that that's true. Because we long for the kind of chemistry and the kind of feeling and the kind of excitement that all brings. That's why some of you dating, your dating is all about the hunt. You hunt. When you get, when you get the prize, when you get the pelt to put up on the wall, you're done. Because you're not looking for something long-term. You're just in it for the chemistry charge. And I want you to know I understand that. I mean, it's part of how we're kind of wired. I mean, how do you think people get together if they don't have some chemistry, The reality is none of this comes naturally. None of this. Nobody is born patient into this world. Just let them go 30 seconds beyond when they're hungry, when they're a baby, and you'll be clear that nobody's born patient in this world, right? Nobody's born kind and considerate that's always thinking about somebody else with no sort of personal things attached to it. I mean, you go through the list, none of this comes naturally. That's why it's important to recognize that if you follow on the natural course, and that natural course is chemistry. It's the passion. It's the stuff that feels good. I mean, who doesn't want that? That's the natural stuff, but to be this other way is not natural. That's why this requires effort. It requires a choice. But here's the good news. You can do this. And I want for you to be able to do this if you're single. More importantly, God wants you to be able to do this. Because God would like nothing better than to see you happy and healthy and whole in a wonderful relationship that's based not totally on chemistry, but totally on love and the relationship that it can bring. It's funny how Paul ends this section on love. Because he tells all this wonderful stuff, and you can read the list as you go out today. There's a half dozen more things about love description. But as he finishes, he says this very interesting thing. He says, when I was a child, I spoke, and I thought, and I reasoned as a child does. Which kind of makes sense, right? When you're a kid, you speak like a kid. When you're a little kid, you kind of hardly speak anything, blah, 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 blah. And parents all seem to know what it is, but nobody else knows what it is, right? But you get a little older, and you begin to think. There's these stages. Teachers will tell you this. There's these stages of learning and how kids look at it. They go through this black and white stage until they're able to process some stuff, and you reason out this stuff. That all kind of makes sense. Paul says, when you're a kid, this is how it works. But when I grew up, he says, I put away those kids' things. I mean, hopefully you don't break out your Barbies anymore and play with them. Or your Legos, Well, when the other, little kids come over, then you can play with the Legos. But you don't break it out by yourself, right? You've put away those things. And here's why this is important for us. Here's how our culture works. Do you know how every childhood story ends? You got the prince and you got the princess, and they got the terrible stepmother, and you got the ogres and the bad king and the bad queen, and you got all this, the dragons, and the prince is able to slay all these things, and he finally meets the girl, and they kiss, and then there's that last scene, and it says they go off in the sunset, and they lived happily ever after. Every childhood story ends that way. The idea, if you can just get the two together, the rest will take care of itself. And you need to know something. That's Disney. That's Hollywood. That's entertainment. That's that hopeful idea. That's that myth that the right person is out there. And if you can just simply get them somehow close together, get throughout all the dragons and all the other, things that are kind of way, if you can just get them together, they will live happily ever after because they've kissed and had this chemistry. It's also a cartoon, by the way. So here's my challenge as we close today. I want to challenge you to become the person you're looking for is looking for. That you begin now, that in every relationship, not just a dating relationship, not just a possible thing, but in every relationship, you begin to say, God, can I work in me? Help me become more patient. Help me become more considerate. Help me to kind of hold myself, when I want to tell the story, just to shut up and say, oh, that's a great story, and let it go at that. Begin to develop that pattern in your life so that it pays off so much later in life. Because here's the reality. If you're kind of living life right now, and at some point you want to maybe change that life is going to keep coming back around again and again. There are people in this room that wish, that pray that they could go back and rewrite sections of their life from before. That they could just erase it all. That it could be done and gone with. And they hoped when they found somebody that would fix it. Or that when they got married, that would fix it. And what they've discovered is none of that fixed it. Because your present will become your past at some point. But it'll also be present in your future. Because that's how relationships are. So become the person you're looking for is looking for. And maybe, according to Paul, maybe it's time to grow up and quit thinking and reasoning like a child. If I just find the prince, I got to kiss a few frogs, but, at some point I'm going to find the prince and everything's going to be happy ever after. Maybe it's time to focus on what you're becoming rather than simply on who you are hunting. Focus on what you are and who you are as opposed to what you're looking for and, ooh, baby, all that kind of stuff that you go through. Are you who? The person you're looking for is looking for. And if you aren't, now is the time to begin to become the person that you're looking for is looking for.